Good morning. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again this morning for Creating Energy Northern Resources Conference. We're excited to be able to be here on the lands of the Denisot people and look forward to bringing you some more interesting conversation with all of our speakers and panelists. Now we're going to go to our first panel, our panel number 1, and it is LNG, a Canadian product in the global market. And here to introduce is Chuck Fowler, the president of Fort St. John and District Chamber of Commerce. Sorry.
Thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, so as Cheryl mentioned, this is the LNG, a pan-Canadian product positioned for a global marketplace. So as Canadian natural gas embarks on a new chapter of LNG, it's going to be important that we recognize that this is not just a regional opportunity or provincial opportunity, but it is actually a Canadian opportunity. I think there's a common misconception that LNG is only going to benefit the people of Fort St. John or the region of Northeast BC or the province of British Columbia, when in fact this is going to be a national product with national opportunities. And in order for us to be successful, I think we need to drive home the promotion and engagement and partnerships across Canada. We need to get everybody on side when it comes to LNG, and this is going to be a critical component, is driving literacy across Canada and recognizing and telling people that there is procurement opportunities and service opportunities and employment opportunities for everybody across Canada. Our panel today is going to kind of give us some insight on what is being done to engage partners across Canada and what we can do to let people know what the opportunities are across Canada. Again, this is a national product that we're going to be promoting in a global marketplace. So this is all important to know that businesses across Canada have opportunities. Our moderator today, in my opinion, doesn't need an introduction. If you've been dabbled in advocacy in British Columbia and in resource development, Mr. Stewart Muir is probably on the tip of the spear when it comes to that. He's one of the founders and creators of an organization called Resource Works, and he is passionate. I've worked with Mr. Muir on other projects, and he's passionate about resource development and letting people know how crucial it is to our economy. Again, sometimes you get away from the rural areas and that message gets lost. And Stewart has been one of the guys that's carried a lot of water and making sure promoting resource development. And this panel is really suited for him. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Muir, and he's going to introduce our panelists, and we're going to go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Stewart Muir here from Resource Works. Chuck, we've had some great times in Fort St. John. You've showed me around, introduced me to your friends, your network. I always appreciate the warm welcome I receive when I'm in the piece, and I look forward to the time when I can be back there. I'm just thrilled to be moderator at the 2021 Creating Energy Northern Resources Conference for the session that's called LNG, a Canadian product in a global market. It's a great title. As Western economies have struggled with the upheavals brought about by globalization, technical change, disruption, we've seen stability in one sector that's consistently strong, and therefore Canada. That's the energy industry. Put simply, Canada's economy cannot prosper without a growing and healthy natural resource sector, of which energy is an extremely large part. It's hard to convey, and I'm always looking for information where I can do this, how much of an impact natural resources have in the economy. Recently we learned that the resource economy in BC is actually bigger than I ever thought. And I study this stuff. We talk about how it's 11% of GDP that's from natural resources, but really some new information shows that undersells it. If you look at the BC economic base and study that, you can see that by measuring the dollars that are brought into the economy through trade and the exports of goods and services, natural resources in BC are actually, wait for it, here's the number, 50% of the BC economy. Here's another thing we know, that in the Peace Country, your typical worker contributes up to 5 times as much to the BC economy, to the prosperity of everybody, as the average worker does across the province. Why is it? Part of why we're here today is to learn things that we can take back to our conversations with others. But, in the piece, it's your supersized contribution to BC prosperity that all residents need to know about and appreciate. And this morning, we're going to peel back some layers, looking specifically, of course, at LNG, liquefied natural gas, and how that's part of our, not just provincial, but more our national and international economy. And in a moment, I'll introduce our 4 panelists. I'm really excited to see this amount of brainpower and expertise, experience here in this call. This is also a rare occasion. If you look to the right of your screen, you'll see a Q&A tab. That's the one you want to be in. And under there, there's a button that says plus add question. I want you to think about a question as you're hearing these speakers and hearing me, and put in a question. Don't be shy. We're all friends here. That's why we're here, to look at this stuff. So we're going to be drilling into the national impact of LNG across Canada, employment effects, economic recovery in COVID, supply chain benefits, challenges. We're also going to look at the benefits from LNG to our global trade, economic as well as environmental standpoint. And we can't say this without recognizing that in the last few days, the progress of the LNG Canada project, to see the news where this massive heat exchanger and the pre-cooler units being taken off ship in Kitimat, that's almost 1,000 tons of gear that's now going to be put in place. For those who thought, wow, what's real here? Well, it's all real, and that's heavy and real. I think let's get into it. We've got a fantastic group here that the Chamber has brought together, Luke and David and Brian and Rocco. I'm just going to quickly introduce all 4 of them, and then in the order that I'm introducing them, I'm going to hand over the podium to them, and then we'll get into a really lively discussion. Don't forget about the Q&A. I want to see some questions there. Come on, Fort St. John Chamber. I know you've got lots of questions, so bring them up here. So quick introductions. I'd like to point to Luke Schwarte. He's Asset Director at LNG Canada. Luke, let's see you. David McCatty. Thanks, Luke. David McCatty. David, I've worked with on some things. He's an amazing guy, VP of Institutional Relations for Tenaris in Canada, big company, international company, and he's chair of Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. That's a major thing. That ties us to the whole national economy, which is really what we want to get at. We've also got Brian Cox. Let's have a look at you, Brian. President and CEO of the Canadian LNG Alliance. I've been working with Brian for years. He's always got something new and interesting. And finally, Rocco Rossi, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Ontario Chamber. There he is. So you're all here. And thanks so much, panel. Let's get started. I'm going to hand over to our first speaker from this panel, and that's you, Luke. Over to you.
Thanks, Stewart. I'm just going to check everybody can hear me. Perfect. So, hello. I'm grateful to be speaking today from the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 6 region in Alberta and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. It's great to be with all of you and to have this opportunity to speak about LNG and the increasingly significant role it will play here in Canada and around the world. I want to thank our moderator, Stewart Muir, my fellow panelists for helping me tell that story, and the Fort St. John Chamber of Commerce for hosting us today. 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to work on the opening of the Montney Shale play in Fort St. John and to be part of the completion of the Dawson Creek water treatment facility. Really foundational experiences, and being here today is building on that legacy. I joined LNG Canada as Asset Director 6 months ago and became part of a team that's committed to building a safe and sustainable facility, strong community relationships, and a globally competitive business. Those are our foundational goals. The work began long before LNG Canada project reached a final investment decision in 2018. They informed how our asset is designed and how it intersects and engages with communities. And that explains, to a great extent, why it's been so strongly embraced by local populations, Indigenous nations, and governments. Those foundational goals also inform our values, which are firmly rooted across our organization and drive the way we, along with our engineering, procurement, and construction contractor, JGC Fluor, approach our work and our relationships with stakeholders. Together we, along with JGC Fluor, put considerable effort into those relationships because without them, quite frankly, there is no LNG Canada project. More than that, our relationships are helping advance meaningful, positive change. This includes engagement with Indigenous communities. Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission made clear that true reconciliation includes economic reconciliation, access to jobs, training and education, and ensuring that Indigenous communities acquire sustainable, long-term benefits from economic projects like ours. We're proud to be part of that effort. We're now in our 3rd year of construction and preparing to reach our first cargo by the middle of this decade. And it's actually 593 tons, Stewart, of steel that's arrived and come in with the main heat exchangers and the pre-coolers. It's such a cool image. As the asset director, I'm looking a bit further down the road at the thousands of cargoes that will follow over the facility's 40-year life. My team is currently focused on attracting the operational workforce needed to compete in the LNG global market. We're looking for that generational opportunity that these careers will have, the good that will be achieved by a strongly inclusive and diverse workplace, and at the barriers that we and the government of BC will help to challenge and remove so that these jobs are available to all. We know that the population growth and development around the world will require more energy with fewer CO2 emissions. Our LNG will provide security of supply for global markets that can rely on Canada's natural gas reserves to advance their economies and reduce global greenhouse gas emissions as natural gas replaces higher emitting sources such as coal. Demand is growing in countries like China, where natural gas use is expected to almost triple by 2040. LNG from all sources, including ours, will make up over 60% of China's demand for imported natural gas. The fact is, LNG will play a key role in global decarbonization. That's something to talk about. For my team, we talk about being part of helping the world breathe. I'm not suggesting that LNG will replace other, more carbon-intensive forms of energy all on its own. LNG is one tool in a low-carbon toolkit, one that obviously includes renewables. There's another piece to consider, which concerns vast numbers of people living across the globe without essentials that others may take for granted. Affordable, accessible, reliable energy needed to move, cook, and stay warm, or for some of them, cool. LNG will provide that energy, enabling them to have a bigger and brighter future. What I'm saying is that LNG from Canada and from Fort St. John will deliver an abundance of good energy for the world. I'm genuinely excited to be and proud to be part of this movement, to provide local benefits, to achieve reconciliation, and to meet human needs and deliver the lowest carbon intensity LNG possible as a preferred energy source. Thank you, and I look forward to our conversation.
Great. Thank you, Luke. That's a terrific global view as well as the national one. You've summarized things nicely. We're going to be going in deeper now as we go over to David McCatty of Tenaris, and with his leadership of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exports, he's connected to the industrial heartland of Canada, of central Canada, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a little about that as well as how that ties into all the manufacturing done elsewhere in the country. David, I'd like to hand the mic over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and I'm very pleased to be here talking about this great topic, Canadian LNG, a Canadian product in the global market. What does that mean? Well, LNG is the product of all of the goods and services that help to develop it. And I'll tell you a little bit about my approach to that. So Tenaris is one of the world's leading companies in both the steel and energy services industries. We manufacture steel pipe that is used to develop oil and gas among our 20,000 employees around the world. And we have more than 600 employees in Canada today. And we're in the middle of an investment of about $120 million to transform our industrial operations in Canada, focus on creating the world's only industrial center capable of producing seamless and welded pipes in all grades and connections in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, the Robertson Huron Treaty region. Why is Tenaris making such an investment, and how does it look at the LNG opportunity in Canada? Well, Canada is today an oil and gas leader, and for the foreseeable future, an oil and gas leader. Its oil reserves ranks number 3 in the world. Its natural gas production ranks number 4 in the world. This combines to make Canada the 4th largest market in the world for energy tubulars, the steel pipes used to develop, process, and transport oil and gas. These are the products that we manufacture. And despite what you read in your Facebook, Twitter, and other feeds, Canada is a beacon for sustainable oil and gas for the world's growing oil and gas or growing energy needs. It's a consistent leader in ESG rankings. Democracy, diversity, equality, rule of law, safety, environment, financial stability, a price on carbon, and innovation to reduce emissions. This is Canada. However, 51% of the world's oil comes today from not free countries, and this percentage is increasing. Countries like Germany, South Korea, France, Japan are highly dependent on not free supply, from 60 to nearly 90%. 49% of the world's natural gas comes from not free countries. LNG export, as you heard already, of natural gas to Asia can replace higher intensity emissions in their electricity generation. The worldwide value of LNG export has increased by 71% in the last 5 years to $130 billion. And this is mainly supplied by not free countries. Does a wealth of energy generally mean an opportunity for manufacturing, domestic manufacturing? Yes, this wealth does. For example, steel is everywhere in the energy development. 30% of Canadian steel consumption is in Canada's energy sector. And if we buy Canadian steel versus steel produced in China or Korea, it has 1/3 to 1/2 the full life cycle GHG emissions. Much of the steel is in steel pipes, like the ones we manufacture in Ontario. In the COVID-19 environment, we notice more now than ever how petrochemical products are required everywhere to keep us safe. Well, if Canada develops its LNG industry, it will continue to consume increasing quantities of Canadian manufactured products in its construction and maintenance, but more importantly, in its development, the natural gas development wells and the infrastructure to bring that natural gas to the coast and export. LNG Canada's first phase has the potential to increase the demand for the products that we produce by $100 million per year. And over the 40-year life, could bring $5 billion to our operations in Ontario. Future growth phases of other LNG projects will generally add a similar amount per project. The opportunity is tremendous. But Tenaris is but one example of how positive this can be for the rest of Canada and other jurisdictions, including Ontario. There are many others, including in our supply chain, but the supply chains of everyone in this. And so, in conclusion, my perspective, Tenaris's perspective, is that LNG's opportunity, the opportunity that you see today, is one that is transformational for Canada. And we look forward to being an important part of this in the future.
Transformational for Canada. That's a good note to segue into our next speaker. David, thank you for those comments. I'm looking forward to the questions that are coming. We've already got one question coming in here or more. Keep them coming in, as we will be coming back to that fairly soon with your questions. So over to Brian. Brian Cox is CEO and president of the Canadian LNG Association. He was with the BC LNG Association and transformed that into the national group. So he's got considerable experience in how the whole Canadian LNG story has evolved. Brian, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Stewart, and hello everybody again. I hope those of you who joined my keynote are joining again here. Again, I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo people. It's great to be on this panel. Stewart, I just looked in the chat and someone said it's a happy belated birthday to you. So I will share in those sentiments and say happy belated. It's great to be on this panel with Rocco and David and Luke. And I say that because a couple of months ago, Rocco hosted us in a panel in Ontario to talk about LNG. And now today we're here virtually in British Columbia talking about LNG. Although it's super tough to continue to do these virtual events, this is the power of these events, is that we can connect in different ways, actually have these really powerful conversations about how we pivot forward as a country moving forward. For those of you that heard my keynote, I'll recap a couple of things. I mean, you heard it in the passion from Luke and David. LNG is an accelerator. It's an accelerator to the things we're looking to solve for, the outcomes we're looking to see, the decarbonization that we can rally around in Canada through what I talk about, a yes and conversation. You heard me talk a lot about that in the prior conversation, but yes and is about having a different way of talking. It's about affirming and driving to solutions. It's about seeing the multiple pathways that we have in order to solve for what we're trying to solve for. And I think you heard within David and Luke's chat about what LNG can truly provide. And this panel powerfully can talk about the pan-Canadian opportunity and the opportunity that parts of the world are looking for when they look at energy equality, reliable, affordable, lower carbon energy. Luke touched on it, but I'll say it again. Nations and regions are choosing LNG. Over half of the LNG that's expected in demand is going to come from countries that have net zero targets themselves. So they are choosing LNG as one of their pathways, a very important pathway to decarbonizing, because it provides the natural gas across applications. Now, again, we're talking electricity, we're talking transportation, we're talking industrial, we're talking residential, and it is a pathway to the hydrogen economy. Hydrogen produced with carbon capture and storage from responsible lowest emission natural gas, that's a pathway, that's a transformational pathway. LNG Canada is a transformational asset. Our other projects that are proposed and we hope to get to FID are as well. And why does it matter? Because we're building the lowest emission LNG industry in the world. We have taken the time to get it right. We have worked in partnership, and we've worked with regulators, with communities, in partnership with Indigenous nations to develop these projects. And now we are positioned to build. And in doing that, we're providing benefit to the entire country. You look at Japan, you look at South Korea, you look at ASEAN countries like Thailand and Vietnam. You look at India, which is putting billions of dollars into infrastructure to transition to LNG as a transportation fuel. You look at the 400 million people currently in China that do not have access to clean cooking fuels. That's a huge impact to human health when you think of the particulate matter. We are solving for those. Canadian LNG can help, and it's our time. So I'm really looking forward to continuing the dialogue. Maybe I'll leave the comments there and say that we have to come together. We have to actually see that there's multiple pathways. This is not an either or conversation. This is a yes and conversation. And LNG is growth. It's economic growth for our country. It's opportunities for Indigenous reconciliation, and it is leading the path to decarbonization. So again, looking forward to the dialogue. Really happy to be here.
Thanks, Brian. Let's turn the mic over to Rocco Rossi from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. Rocco, it's all yours.
Thanks, Stewart. Any day you can have Stewart, Luke, David, and Brian as your warm-up act is a good day. So absolutely delighted to be here with you. We meet in cyberspace, but I sit here in the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And the reason why it's so appropriate that the land acknowledgements happen in conversations like this one is that the natural resources sector does more in terms of real reconciliation, in terms of real economic reconciliation than any other sector in the Canadian economy, including the government. One company alone in the oil and gas industry, Suncor, does more business with Aboriginal businesses than the entire federal government. And not just by a little bit, 10 times as much. And that's just one company. There's so many others. So that is one of the reasons why it's so important to look at the key leverage of the natural resources sector done appropriately, as it's done by great characters like LNG Canada. Two, this is not a Western Canadian issue, as has been related. This is all of Canada issue, and I would argue it's a global issue, because if we convert just a little bit of China's power generated by coal with Canadian liquefied natural gas, that's worth more in terms of GHG reduction than shutting down the entire Canadian economy all at once. Consider that. Thinking globally, acting locally. 3, jobs. David mentioned the phenomenal Tenaris plant in Sault Ste. Marie, which I've had the great privilege of visiting. And the multiplier effect into the steel industry and into every service industry in Sault Ste. Marie, in the steel production of Hamilton, is felt throughout the Ontario economy. And that doesn't begin to take into account financing, legal, engineering, control systems. So the leverage impact, huge. The environmental impact is not simply about converting Chinese coal or Indian coal to liquefied natural gas. Ontario took the single biggest step towards meeting Canada's Paris Accord targets by shutting down our coal-fired plants. And we were only able to do that, one, by the crown jewel of our nuclear energy industry, and 2, natural gas for peak power needs. So it's already played a significant role and needs to play a continuing role. And then the final point, and this is one that I would reiterate and expand upon, that David also touched on, where so much of natural resources, oil and gas, is coming from non-free countries. And that is the biggest euphemism that could ever be mentioned, because we're talking about almost 1 million barrels of oil that arrive on the east coast of Canada every day from Saudi Arabia, a country that is connected to the death and dismemberment of a journalist, from Venezuela, an autocratic regime from which 5 million Venezuelans have fled in the last several years because they are literally starving and do not have the freedoms that we are blessed with. I would stack the environmental records and focus of our natural resource companies against anyone in the world. We all want lower GHG. We know it's going to be a transition period. Why wouldn't we want to prioritize those companies from those countries that actually care about human rights, that actually care about worker rights, that actually are investing in reducing GHG intensity in their production and their output? So you add those pieces together, jobs and economic multiplier within the economy, real contribution to reconciliation with our First Nations brothers and sisters, a real impact both domestically and globally on GHG reduction, and supporting companies and countries and producers that actually care and are doing things about human rights, worker rights, environmental protections. You put that in a package, and this is a crown jewel, not just for BC, not just for Western Canada, not just for Canada, but for the globe as a whole. And that's why we're so excited at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce to be big supporters of this initiative.
Wow, Rocco, you've lifted us up with that energy and enthusiasm for this. That's just a tremendous statement. Thanks so much for that. I'd like to move into some questions. I had my own questions, but I noticed that our attendees have way better questions than I do. So why don't we just go to them? And I think the higher level question that Chuck Fowler from Fort St. Fort St. John Chamber of Commerce has asked is a good one. Good one to get the conversation started. What can we do? Asks Chuck in the chat here to the right, and others. You can put your questions here too. We've got 4 in there, I think. Keep them coming. Chuck asks, what can we do personally to promote LNG Canada-wide? What actions can attendees take themselves to promote LNG? I think the person to start with this question is Brian Cox. Brian, what do you think?
Wow. Yes, it's a great question, and it is. It's like, what's the call to action? We attend so many of these things. I know all of us have been glued to our computer screens for the last 16 months, and it's sometimes you leave conversations saying, what's the next step? Well, really, this is the power of the chamber network. And, you have Rocco here representing all the chambers in Ontario, the Fort St. John Chamber, and many others through British Columbia. It's about engaging and looking for those shared values, which I call them. And that's why the Conference Board of Canada report that we talked about in the last panel, I'll talk about again, basically showing, what growing the LNG industry in British Columbia would look like for the entire Canadian economy. I think those are the important places to start, because it does not matter what industry you're in. It does not matter what sector you work in. When we're able to build big things in this country, everyone benefits. And so I think that's how you have those shared conversations to say, you know what, we're going to need all shoulders to the wheel moving forward as a country to ensure that our economy is rock solid. And, the LNG Canada project, it's something that's not talked about enough. It's the project, along with CGL, that's kept the BC economy going over the last 15 months. And by extension into the Canadian economy, we can have more. Why? Because, again, all of those great environmental and social and governance metrics that we're able to demonstrate every single day. So I think that's really the key to it, is finding those shared conversations that you as individuals and members can see within this industry, because LNG is far more than a fuel. It is an accelerator to all of the things that we're looking to solve for strong, healthy, inclusive communities in our country and across the world. So I think we start there and grow larger from that, and to see ourselves as a country again, because like I say, we haven't had a lot to rally around in the last long while. And we can rally around decarbonization because we can see ourselves in it. And I think that's the key. Canadians have to see themselves in this next stage of economic development. So we got to make it collectively relevant.
Thanks, Brian. There's some good questions here. I'm just going to come back to those in a moment and ask a question of my own to kind of embellish where you've left things off. I actually want to turn to Rocco because I'd like to get a little more granular. Where are the benefits of the LNG Canada project? We hear kind of the high level, the billion-dollar numbers, the thousands of workers, those numbers. But could you maybe give us a little bit of example in your experience, Rocco, of what are some of the companies? I mean, we've heard about Tenaris, and that's about making steel components. That's a really great visual. But are there some more that we can get into?
Well, you're looking at the steel producers themselves, the Algomas of the world. You're looking at the banking sector. You're looking at engineering firms. You're looking at law firms. Go down Bay Street, and you don't pass many doors in the legal community that don't have a significant practice in the oil and gas industry. And certainly the TSX, although oil and gas doesn't represent what it once did, is still a major contributor to the market and the market activities. But for me, where it really hits home is at the depth of oil that had gone negative in price, going through the streets of Sault Ste. Marie and seeing people who had been laid off, whether it was from the steel mill, whether it was from even Tenaris' facility and associated companies. That's where you see the day-to-day impact of this. So that's as granular as you can get.
Great. Thanks, Rocco. I'd like to extend this a little bit further. And to do that, I'd like to turn to Luke. And, we've heard from you about the specific LNG Canada terminal. That's your wheelhouse. I'm asking you to come out just a little bit further, bigger picture, because I'm going to quote my friend Philip Cross, the economist in Ottawa, who studied LNG extensively. He sees three broad economic benefits to LNG. The categories are building the pipelines and terminals. So we've kind of talked about that. The second thing is increasing BC's natural gas production. I'd like to hear about that. And thirdly, raising the price received for natural gas exports, which is kind of what it's all about. On the second of those two, the increased prices and increased production of natural gas, Luke, in terms of your wheelhouse in the project, how do you see those issues as being one of the benefits of LNG Canada?
Yeah, thanks, Stewart. When you talk about that, I recall actually being and working in the Groundbirch asset and going through the price decline that we experienced as I think I watched over almost a decade, sort of a contraction in that segment. And I think it affects all the industries that have been talked about on this call in terms of, what are we getting for the product that's being extracted as Canadians? And I can say honestly that the export terminal and the pipeline are the path to opening up the ability to access other markets. So when you talk about the ability to move the industry forward, first is, from a customer perspective, we're offering a preferred product. You can see that the world is moving to and selling more LNG cargoes that are net neutral. So you're saying, okay, well, there's a value in terms of consumption from the customer segment saying we want to be able to consume more responsibly. We want to be able to consume lower carbon footprint. We want to feel that about the energy that we consume. And so opening up that pathway turns into an uplift in terms of price. It's actually saying there'll be more opportunity for export markets. And what I'm really hoping is that, as you've seen and you've spoken with wood fiber coming up close, hopefully to an FID, and then Cedar just announcing with Chief Crystal Smith their partnership with Pembina, that we're not the only export facility, but we're the start of a generational change and an access to global markets for all of this industry. And so, Stewart, I think in short, if there's more customers that have what you want and you have a pathway to service them, then you have that opportunity to grow the segment, to lift prices, and to ultimately make for more prosperity across the value chain.
That's a great perspective. Thanks, Luke. One of the things that I'm constantly trying to understand, and I don't feel like I'm fully there, and hopefully this group of experts, I don't know who wants to answer this. I'm going to let you raise your hand or jump in. Here's the question. As we look south to the United States, in 10 years, while we've been talking about LNG and building LNG and having some small LNG wins, don't forget the new one in Fort Nelson. It's real. It's not huge, but, very small progress towards finished facilities. Whereas over the same time period in the United States, we've seen, my count is 7 export terminals created. Some of them are reversals. It's not necessarily greenfield, but still, these are terminal capacity for exports. They're getting the benefits. Here's a question I've got. What benefits is the United States economy and the regional economy down in Texas and Louisiana getting by having these 6 export terminals? I read it was a 1 or 2 week period, they were shipping out $2 billion worth of LNG. That's a staggering amount. How does this come back into the economy in their case? Let's use the example of what's actually happened in the States to kind of, try to understand what is going to happen in 2025, or when that first ship leaves Kitimat. What are those impacts? Who would like to speak to that? I know you all have a perspective on it, but I'm going to put someone on the spot because I know you're all sort of different experts in this. I'm going to go to Rocco because, big picture in the economy. So what do you think Texas and Louisiana and the United States are getting from their 7 terminals? And would it be nice for us to have those?
I think there are 2 themes. The economic ones, I think, are pretty obvious in terms of jobs, economic activity, reliability, et cetera. But I think the larger geopolitical is that in just a short part of our lifetime, the United States has basically become self-sufficient in energy. And that is a long cry from what they had to deal with in the 70s and the oil shocks, and it puts them in a very different position in the world. It puts all of what's happening in the Middle East in a very different light, and I do find it more than just a little bit hypocritical that this U.S. government prides itself in shutting down Keystone XL, whereas the prior administration and the one before that, I'm talking about Obama, basically built the equivalent of 5 or 6 Keystones in that period. So what's good for the goose should be good for the gander, and we haven't seen that same benefit, and we have every right to it.
Yep.
Maybe if I could jump in and say, what is it that Canada is not getting? And I think that this is important for Canadians to understand across the country and in all different communities. Canada's suffering from a merchandise trade balance that is negative. And it's not a small negative, it's a big negative. And we had a surplus back in 2005. Our business investment growth ranks 31st in the OECD, especially in machinery, equipment, and structures. Business investments as a share of GDP versus the US has declined since 2015, which means it's falling behind in digitization. In the last 10 years, real business investment in software increased 4 times faster in the United States compared to Canada. And in labor productivity, where Canada ranks 29th in the OECD. So what is it that Canada's not getting when we don't develop our resources like LNG? Is that we aren't as attractive as a place to invest in all kinds of things along that supply chain. And so I would propose, can we really afford to turn away from an industry that together is so important and such a driver of investment as Canada's LNG industry is? And I think we can only say, let's recover one project at a time, but let's recover. And LNG is very important, but we've seen in the Q&A, we're wondering why we can't get our resources from west to center to east, whether it's oil or whether it's hydrogen, whether it's hydrogen that we have an abundance of in the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, and we have real projects for carbon capture, storage, and utilization. This is what the industrial Canada needs. And so you can't just pick and choose. We need to develop our LNG industry because it helps for the health of the entire industry.
Brian, could I turn to you? Because I think there's another perspective, and thanks for that, David. That's really, really helpful.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to build on it, and maybe, I'm an optimist by nature. You have to be in these industries, and I really think that we've taken the necessary time in Canada to develop this industry in the right way, in partnership. And I think you just look at the projects that are the LNG Canada project that's being built, wood fiber, Cedar, Fortis BC's Tilbury project. I mean, the wood fiber project, the Squamish Nation is a regulator on that project. There has been literally years and years and over a decade of work done between communities, proponents, governments to get this industry to a place where we're ready to build now. Why is that important? Luke just talked about it. The world is rapidly moving the market to carbon neutral cargoes. That's where we win with the lowest emission projects. So it's actually our time. This is now our time to develop this industry. So that's my perspective on it. And so what's it going to take? Us coming together to say it's multiple pathways. LNG is one of those. It's a transformation fuel. All of those things. So now's the time.
You know, I think it would be really interesting to get the global supermajor perspective on this, because that's really where LNG Canada is nested from Luke's perspective. I think it would be fair to say, in terms of these bigger issues that Brian's talking about, and then the national issues that we're hearing about from David and Rocco, when you bring together the consortium that made LNG possible from a whole bunch of different countries on the other side of the Pacific, and plus the international the boardroom or executive suite of your parent company. Luke, how do they perceive what's going on in Canada? Is there any insight you can give us?
No, absolutely. I think first, I echo a lot of the comments that are made by the fellow panelists, particularly Brian. You know, I think that the line I love the most is it's our time. And so just from a national perspective, I do think you're right, Brian, that we've taken the time to be ready to be a part of this transition and actually be a leader in what's possible. And I never want to leave it unsaid, Stewart, this is still the largest single capital investment in Canada ever. So when we say we're looking south for inspiration, I sometimes think sometimes we could just look a little inward and be proud of where we're actually at. So at least a perspective on that. As far as our joint venture partners and their views, I would say that their investment in this project has been predicated on understanding a generational view of what energy will take. When you think about supplying China and you think about what Brian discussed in terms of who has access to that clean energy, the real challenges in some of the major cities in China that actually are choked with air pollution. So the perspective that we get is deliver it as per promise. And we have already a place for these cargoes in the global market. So I would say we get nothing but support for saying low carbon intensity fuels are necessary. They're needed now. They're needed for the long haul. And when we brought everybody together, it was a lot of holding hands and understanding that takes a considerable amount of effort and energy. It takes a strong amount of engagement and understanding in a complicated but also robust regulatory environment such as Canada. And then, to be honest, a lot of investment comes into countries like ours because it has that stability. So once you've built your facility, that for generations to come, you'll be able to produce that product and provide it to the markets that you service today.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Luke. I'm going to go to the Q&A from the audience because I'm seeing a pattern here. What I think the questions are showing us, and we'll dive into those in a second, is that there's a bunch of people in the conference today whose work is maybe in the local communities, who are working in First Nations. They're working with those who are trying to get into the workforce, or those who have issues they're trying to resolve. I'd like to take into sort of one question. Let's wrap up a number of these. I mean, I think Sarah's got a great question. How do we keep our contractors and employees safe? Because being safe is part of confidence in working in something. I'm going to add to that what Kathleen is saying about SEG and EDI policy and projects. How do you balance? She asks, how do you balance and support that conversation in small rural communities where much of the product is sourced from? Let's not stop there and going through these questions, because I think Jared's one, he's pointed it at Luke, but I think everyone maybe could get a piece of this, is you mentioned the ambition to remove barriers to employment for workers, to find opportunities with LNG projects. How do some of the most vulnerable citizens get their foot? That's kind of still in that hyper-local basket. And let's pause there. So this is a question from 3 different questioners about that local impact. And if we want this project and other projects like this to be successful, I'll bet these kinds of questions need to be answered in a way that the practitioners here feel confident. So who'd like to jump in as we share knowledge in building confidence? I'm going to point to Brian, because at that higher level, I think it's a good place to start, and maybe others can jump in other angles.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we have, Stewart, is a tremendous opportunity. We know that we're on a journey. We need to improve access and equality throughout our projects, throughout corporate Canada, throughout every single industry that we have. There's an incredible opportunity to engage Indigenous Canadians, new Canadians, women. We have a job to do. And so I think with these projects, what you're seeing, and I think Luke can really speak to it, is how we're engaging as an industry on projects that are happening right now. And David obviously can talk about what's happening at a company like Tenaris, but this is really our opportunity in building the largest project in Canadian history. How is it actually resonating on the ground, and how are those benefits being realized, and are they the jobs that can be along the journey to a career? And you know what? There's lots of work going on there, and it takes all of us to do that. To say that we're perfect, that's not going to happen. We have to do this and get better at it so that we can do more of it. And I think having an industry leader, a first entrant like LNG Canada and Coastal GasLink is absolutely excellent, because what's happening is really, really quite remarkable. So I think that's kind of the way to frame it, is we've got lots to do. We're really working hard at it. We have to, like anything, you can't get better unless you can measure it, right? So you have to be able to measure what you're doing and then improve upon it as you continue down the path. So maybe I'll leave it there and leave it to the others who are working on the ground every day.
Well, let me turn to Luke, if I may, Luke. And I know you're not speaking for Coastal GasLink, and they're really separate projects, but a lot of people see them as part of that overall LNG piece. If you feel comfortable giving us some examples from that space as well, because of the linear infrastructure, it touches so many communities. I think LNG Canada has done an amazing job with programs for workforce entry by groups that wouldn't naturally be the ones who get to the front of the line. I think that's been tremendous to see this happen. In terms of the questions we've been seeing here, can you help these practitioners in the field to develop the messages that they're confident in on these concerns they're airing here?
No, it's a great question, Stewart, and I always appreciate a dialogue around safety. So, the tagline for our project is the safest project on Earth, and I happen to have been in a room in Kitimat with a leadership team in 2014 when that concept was coined. If you're going to build a mega project, how are you not going to inherit the history that so many others have inherited? And really saying, what is the legacy that you'll leave? And so with that, I would say that we've work to live that every day with JGC Fluor and all of our subcontractors to say, how is today the safest day? How is today the step towards that safest project on Earth? Do we get it right all the time? No, it's a constant learning process, and we need to understand how to continue to be better. But when I think about that and that core value, it sort of permeates into the rest of what we experience, and particularly COVID. And I'll be just a little bit long-winded here, Stewart, so you'll have to give me a bit of space. But to get through COVID, we had to really focus on protecting our people, protecting our community, and protecting our project, and in that order. And we've worked diligently with the public health authorities to actually figure out, how do you do this safely? Did we know the answers on day one? No. But we've been able to continue to keep the project moving, to hit milestones like all of our pile driving completed, to have the delivery and the actual receiving yard ready when the exchanger came over. We've done all that in the last 18 months. We've actually continued to have people work in COVID in this phase and deliver that goal zero and that focus on being safest project. As far as the next part is, I think that over the last many years, we've actually already spent over $3 billion locally, and that's with local and Indigenous communities. Of that, almost 2.6 is specifically into Indigenous joint ventures or Indigenous contracts and Indigenous companies. So when you talk about that opportunity, I think the first obligation you have is to actually put your money where your mouth is and actually sit down at the table and support those businesses in that area. And when you do that, I think it starts to speak to some of your commitments to ESG and how are those companies being formed? How is that relationship working? Who are they employing? How are you working together to actually change the dynamics to include the people that are disadvantaged or have barriers? And then I'll get really specific, because it's a really I say it internally, but I don't want this to be my grandfather's oil company. I've got a young daughter, and she's 11 years old. And I want her to look in and see that she has a part or a place, if she chooses, in that segment. And so we're focusing on real things. This week, we restarted our Women Building Futures whole campaign and effort, which saw our first cohort since COVID come back in of women who did not have access to the core trade skills and did not have access to the jobs that are actually on our site, and brought them in with the green experience and actually provided them with that training and then the job, and allowed them to start that generational transformation for themselves. So I would say that I don't have all the answers. I don't think any of us will pretend to, but knowing that you're going to send people home the same way they showed up makes that a compelling offer. Knowing you're putting your money into the local community and actually doing business in that community. And then the last segment is actually, I think, specifically offering those people that don't typically get access the leg up to actually get to a level playing field to participate. And that's specifically through programs like that. And there's many more. I won't list them all. But if anybody's looking to be a part of that, those programs are on our website. Those programs are available, and it's going to be those efforts that change the who works in this segment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Luke. Lots there. Rocco?
I love how Luke and Brian put it, in particular Luke saying we don't have all the answers. The point I would stress, come back to, is that in many other of the non-free energy producing jurisdictions, those questions wouldn't even be asked, wouldn't be allowed to be asked, would not be responded to. So again, it's to reinforce this issue of we're not going to get it right all of the time, but we actually care and are focused on making a difference. And that should mean something to people in this transition period of what industries, in what countries you want to support and be part of, because of precisely the fact that those questions are being asked and are being seriously answered.
And I'd like to share that it is not just large multinational oil and gas companies that are committed to the same level of safety. That's a value that is spread across this resource sector in the supply chain of those that are serving these oil and gas companies, whether it is in Fort St. John, or whether it's in Grand Prairie, or whether it's in Edmonton or Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. The commitment to safety, the commitment to sharing a vision that this is a healthy and vibrant community where we're supporting STEM education, encouraging young people to get involved while they're in school, while they're thinking about these opportunities. These are things, when we go back to the question of what can we all individually do, we need to tell the story of how valuable this sector is and how we're all working together with the same objectives. It's creating something for our country. It's creating something that is going to be better for our next generations. And I'll use an example. I chaired a fundraising committee that was organizing money for STARS Air Ambulance, and we wrapped up our campaign last Thursday night. We raised $1 million in this very challenging environment. But who are the people that were getting together? These were the oil and gas companies that are working in the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, including Petronas, who is a partner in the LNG development, and it's the service supply and manufacturers that are across the country. We are multinationals, but we're also single business entities, and we all share that commitment to safety, safe medical outcomes, safe place to work, and responsible place to work, regardless of the community you are. And I think that's where we need to tell the story more, because it's individuals telling stories to their brothers, their cousins, their relatives that share the value of this and where Canada's place in the world is. And it comes from the grassroots. And so that's where I think in the local community of Fort St. John, compare that to the local community of Sault Ste. Marie, people are the same. They have the same values. And what we want is to do it right.
Thank you, David. We're getting so many good questions here. I'd like to acknowledge and respect a couple of questions that are on some localized issues. I think if you've got issues like that, you have a chamber that's wonderful and open to this, and it allows you to have relationships with all scale of businesses. We won't have time in this session to get into those granular local issues, but I just wanted to acknowledge them. We've got a really good question from Mindy here on ESG, and I'm just scrolling. Oh, here it is. As Canada strives to become more sexy again from a global market to invest in LNG projects, how do we accomplish this while addressing ESG, with the I included standards, ESG standards, and create metrics for industry to define those benchmarks? That's a great question. I see that all the time. Who wants to hit this one? Go for it, David.
A fast answer to that is the first thing you can do for ESG is choose Canadian, because on average you are doing better than anywhere else in the world. Then there are other more detailed, but I would say first step, choose Canadian where you can.
Great, thanks. Anyone else want ESG? Environment, society, governance. I see, just in a few words, a lot of hype about ESG, but we also see almost a gold rush for those who are seeking to put their framework around it, or be it the investor groups or international governments or companies that are seeking capital. All of them have slightly different views on this, and for ESG to be a durable term that actually has meaning, I think it looks to me like the work is in progress. That's my 2 cents on it. I'd like to turn to a question from Jeff Morrison. He says, Rocco, great point about the USA becoming energy self-sufficient and a net export of energy in our lifetime. Who would have foreseen that 10 years ago, right? Do you think, Rocco, that Ontarians recognize that they are getting most of their natural gas from the US? And do you think that means anything to them?
We're very aware of it because there's an ongoing battle right now over Enbridge's Line 5 into the Sarnia refinery complex, and actions being taken by the Michigan governor and her attorney general to try to shut that down. So we are aware of it in a big way, in an increasing way. But again, it comes back to look. I think the issue of Energy East has to be revisited. I think it makes incredible sense for all of the reasons that David has already outlined, and again, we're moving to a lower GHG world, but not tomorrow. And while we're doing that, I want to deal with the default being the best and the most responsible producers, and along the way create jobs and opportunities for all of us, because ESG for me also has to be ESGI. I mean, indigenomics needs to be at the heart of that, particularly in Canada. And the natural resources sector is really the only sector that has seriously been playing a role on the economic side of that. Not always done appropriately, but this is where the real opportunity lies. We need to leverage it.
Yeah, and I'd like to bridge from that, Rocco, very interesting, to something that Clarence is asking. And I know I've said, the highly local issues will be difficult to deal with in this call, but he's raising a really good point, and you've raised it, ESGI, Indigenous. And he says, how is LNG planning to work with First Nations to change federal legislation on the oil and gas industry? Maybe more general terms, because this could be probably a PhD dissertation for someone, and we don't have time for that as we're getting into the closing minutes, I think. Just some thoughts from anyone on creative ways for First Nations entrepreneurs, those trying to get into business opportunities, procurement issues. You're probably hearing different perspectives, different frustrations as well. A few words of advice from anyone for those like Clarence who are seeking to break through some frustrations. Anyone like to touch on that? Yeah, Luke, please.
Thanks, Stewart and Clarence. I think it's a genuine and incredibly relevant question. I didn't come out first on ESG because I think sometimes we do take up a lot of the airspace in these topics. So what I would say is I acknowledge it as being a genuine issue, and it's something that we are working and do work and have worked hard on for many years. I would say that I feel the most confident in the time with LNG Canada, where we've actually not only put forward what we're going to do, but actually been quite serious about how we actually distribute the business with our prime contractors. What I found, though, more and more is that actually our prime contractors, and much like David shared, they're sharing those same interests, those same values, and those same concerns, not only because of their personal beliefs, but because the investment community is also expecting them to do something different. And so I think it's just become the right thing to do. Does that actually say that every barrier has been removed and that everybody's getting onto every list? I would say no. I would, every day when I see where we're going to provide opportunity, those questions come up first. So how did we get to here? Have we included the right people? If there's someone that couldn't make the list because they have a gap, what are we doing to actually partner with them and close the gap? And I would just say that this is an active area. It's something where I believe the conversation is more open than I've ever seen it. And we've found great partnerships with LEDCOR. We've seen great moves forward with High-C and C-SPAN. So things that I hadn't seen in the past are really happening now. And so my ask would be Clarence's patience and perseverance. I think that's always a hard and a tall ask. But I do believe that this, in my experience, is changing. It's just not fast enough. So I appreciate the question. I appreciate where you're coming from, and it's action every day on my part and other leaders in these positions to be sure that this isn't continuing to be the case. As far as lobbying and working with the federal government, I'll leave that to others. It's not the business that I'm particularly focusing on this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Luke. I know there's a similar question on women in the workforce. There's been some interesting work done. There's a good question. I don't think we have time to fully get into it, but I'd like to acknowledge the question on how does the culture from these bigger organizations like the LNG project itself, how does that filter down? You've kind of touched on it, Luke, your reference to LEDCOR. How does it filter down to the whole contractor, the archipelago of services? I don't know if you want to get into that. I think it's probably a hot topic for lots of people.
It's true. I'll grab a small piece of it and I'll welcome others. I think there's great people on the call. Yeah. So I'll address it in two parts. One is, and I said it, and it's something that I firmly believe, not my grandfather's oil company. And so the first thing is for people to actually come into our facility and actually meet people that look like them, that speak like them, that share the same core beliefs as them. That's the first step that we're really, really focusing on as we go from the 30 people on the team up to the 300 or so that will operate the facility. And we're doing that deep work now, and we're not doing it alone. So we've had engagements with other women, particularly, that are actually looking to become part of the industry, have been in the past. What are their experiences? What didn't work and why? And then we're having a lot of discussions with the BC government and with the Haisla Nation and the local nations to say, what is it that you need? I'm not going to show up and give you the solution that I think you need. That what is your expectation? How are we going to make this possible? And so those dialogues are going on now. I acknowledge that, in my past, as I've seen most of the control rooms and most of the maintenance workforces, you're talking about 10%, if you're lucky, maybe 15% women in those disciplines, trades, and taking those trainings. And so to me, it's a bunch of upfront investment now. It's partnerships. It's removing some of the easy barriers like access to daycare. If you'd like to do shift work, you can't drop your kids off at 8 and pick them up at 5. What's our part? How do we actually move that needle? So what I would say is that it's an intentful focus. It's real action. It's a conversation that I was having this morning, and I've had just about every day to make that difference. My only ask is, for those of you that are thinking about entering and you don't think it's your place to be, that's not true. And please come help me make that the future that we all believe in and experience. Thanks.
Thanks, Luke. We're probably down to the last 3-4 minutes. If any of our co-panelists wanted to jump into that, please just do it. But I'd like to go as we start to close down this great, fascinating conversation. I'd like to just go to the higher level, global level. Say Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia. These regions are almost, in policy terms, unrecognizable from what we're seeing right now in North America and a lot of Western Europe. These regions are increasingly reliant on LNG imports and are happy to talk about it. They're happy to talk about how they're continuing to build natural gas infrastructure. They're happy to know that they're They've got gas-friendly, LNG-friendly government policy. They're happy to see continued investment in fossil fuel projects by the banks of Asia Pacific and the lenders. They're happy to say that they're deploying new technologies that are going towards net zero, that are using maybe clean hydrogen in the mix, energy storage, advanced nuclear, heck, all of them, all of the above, please. They're happy to do these things. They're relying on creative business models, creative business leaders in the Asia Pacific. They have supportive policy mechanisms to drive adoption and lower costs. It seems like at so many levels of government in Canada, it's the exact opposite. They're unhappy about all of the things that they're happy about in Asia. And it's so upside down. We know that what we're doing is moving in the right direction for climate policy. If you study the material, you do the numbers, there's just no other way. We need LNG in the mix. Here's my question. I'm going to throw it out there. This can be a free-for-all as we glide to a close here, but I think it'll be a fun free-for-all if that's what it is. Seriously though, how could we make Canadian policymakers, Canadian leaders, Canadian financial institutional lenders and leaders as excited about LNG as they are in Northeast and Southeast Asia? Anyone?
I can start on that.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I'll take a first stab. Look, Canada is extremely proud of the fact that it's signed more free trade agreements than any other country on earth. We have access to more markets, including a free trade agreement with South Korea that predated CETA with the European Union. We signed on to CPTPP to try to access that Asian market and provide diversification away from our longtime dependence on the U.S. And I think what's going to get Canadian policymakers excited about it is the fact that at the other end of those trade agreements are precisely those people that you're talking about, Stewart, who need and want this product. And if we're going to be in the game and leverage all of this incredible work that's been done building these free trade agreements, then we have to be part of the solution.
Thanks, Rocco. Brian.
Yeah, this has been a great dialogue, and I really like how Luke was talking about not wanting to create his grandparents' industry. I said that in my remarks before. Well, guess what? We're having our grandparents' dialogue right now in this country. It's really boring. Like, we're having this polarized, angry, divisive dialogue about whose idea is better, whose solution is the best one. And by doing that, we're not doing anything. It's time for us to come together to talk about the multiple pathways that it's going to take. And it's talking about the right solution in the right place at the right time. And countries around the world are making those decisions. And they're choosing LNG, and they're choosing renewables, and they're choosing hydrogen. It's all part of the solution. We're making the same decisions here in Canada. However, we're having the wrong conversations. And so how on earth are policymakers supposed to make decisions if all they hear is noise? We have to stop yelling at each other, and we have to come together and drive to solutions, because guess what? Times are changing. There's a generational shift happening, and it's all about collaboration. So the time is now. We need to stop talking at each other and start talking with each other.
That's great timing, because Cheryl has reappeared. Thank you, Cheryl Montgomery, for coming back. I'm just going to do a quick wrap up here, because I need to say thanks to the incredible audience members who've stimulated this conversation with some great questions. Sorry if we didn't get to every single one, but I think we tried to cover all that. And then, of course, we've got to say thanks to this panel of high achievers and informed people who've shared a lot of valuable information. And Rocco and Brian and Luke and David, thanks so much for being part of this today. And Cheryl, thanks for being an enabler of this to happen. I appreciate being part of it. So thanks for that.
Well, I really want to thank you all. We're so fortunate to have this quality of speaker involved in our conference. So thank you so much for participating. Big thanks also to Rocco, Brian, Luke, and David. I can't even tell you how much I appreciate what you guys bring to this dialogue that needs to happen so much. And of course, to the magician, Stewart, Muir, and your mastery at moderating, thank you so much. You bring so much to the conversation as well. Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we wrap up, I just want to note that, clearly there's a woman and an Indigenous person missing from this session. And that's by task, because we have our woman coming up in our next keynote session, and we have Chief Charlene Gale coming up tomorrow morning. And so we want to make sure that everybody is highlighted in their own capacity. So trust me, we have not forgotten that demographic in this session. We want to make sure they have their own stage. So make sure that everybody checks in for those sessions as well. Again, I want to say a quick thank you to everybody for joining us. I also really want to acknowledge our sponsors who have helped make this such a success and have supported us all the way through this. Of course, Tourmaline is our presenting sponsor. We also want to acknowledge CAP, Coastal GasLink, City of Fort St. John, MNP, SurePoint, Enbridge, Solaris, Petronas, Tenaris, and Digital Supercluster. Thank you to everybody who has contributed to making this fantastic gathering of, as you said, I think you said at the beginning, Stewart, brain power in one room. And we definitely have that here. So thank you, everybody. And we will see you all for our next session with Susanna Pierce coming up at 1 o'clock. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.